Welcome to Planning Period. I'm Wesley Lawson, an academic coach and educator in Georgia, and let's get started talking about how you can be successful at teaching SS6H3, the history standard of Europe for sixth graders. In Standard A, you will have to talk about World War I and its impact on Europe. Now, what's very interesting is that the standard starts after World War I. Notice the key word, the aftermath of World War I. Almost every part of the element of this standard in SS6H3A, the aftermath of World War I, students will not be very familiar with the concept. For example, there's communism that students have to understand, the rise of communism after World War I. Let me give you some tips and tricks on how to help students understand this. Basically, the standard used to talk about how the rise of communism increased with the overthrow of the Romanov dynasty in Russia. Those words aren't in there anymore, but it's still a great way to help students conceptualize what happened. So in times past, and I still encourage you to do this today, talk about how when the war was over, people were extremely upset because they lost their brothers, their sons, their fathers to a war outside of Russia, and they came back to a country where they couldn't afford to heat their homes or feed themselves. And so they got so angry that they overthrew the type of autocratic government, the monarchy that they had for so many centuries. And I tell them about the story of how the Romanovs were herded out of their house and taken into a forest in Russia and then killed and buried in that forest in basically unmarked graves. And I tell them about the story of Anastasia, how there was a rumor that got out about one of the Romanovs still lived. And we might even play a clip of Anastasia. So you're bringing in their very little background knowledge to show them you actually do know something about the rise of communism, and help them to understand that it was after that system of government that was overthrown that the Soviet Union became the communist, and not just there in Russia, but throughout Europe. So that is the first part. They need to understand that communism is a type of government where you're trying to eliminate the super wealthy and the super poor, and everyone owns the same property and has the same access to the same resources in theory. So I have my sticky notes here. The next part of element A is talking about the Treaty of Versailles. This is going to be important in element B of the standard. Students need to understand that the Treaty of Versailles was the treaty that ended World War I, and they need to understand that it was a very strict consequence for the losing side. So help students understand that this is going to actually lead into World War II because the consequences were so brutal for Germany that the people were willing to give rise to what we also see in this standard of a Nazi government led by Adolf Hitler. Help them to understand that the reason that Germany's economy was so horrible that people were starving in the streets because they were charged reparations to pay for the war because they were the losing side. Even though both sides were pretty much equally responsible for the cause of World War I, the main causes, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, that Germany lost, and so they got the brunt of the consequences. And they could not pay those reparations back because their most lucrative property, the Rhineland, where they could have mined for resources and perhaps paid back the reparations and kept their economy afloat, that was also taken in the Treaty of Versailles. So students should understand that losers don't get to set the rules. Germany lost, and it made the German people very discontent and even more nationalistic. And then the last part of the standard talks about the Great Depression. This is a part of the standard that students may have a little bit of knowledge of, especially coming out of 5th grade, where you study U.S. history in Georgia. They did get a little view of the Great Depression, but not in a worldwide sense. So what I like to do is show students graphs and charts so that they can see that steep decline in unemployment or that steep decline in stock market value. You can pull up graphs and charts to get their understanding of the Great Depression over to them, but nothing is going to get over the concept of the Great Depression like personal anecdotes. So you might find videos of people that lived through the Great Depression describing it. So help them understand that all these things, the rise of communism, the Treaty of Versailles, Nazism, and the Great Depression were the aftermath of World War I. And I, again, will say that it's odd because you never talk about the onset of World War I, but you're already talking about the aftermath. But that is how the standard is written. Now let's look at element B. Element B talks about what contributed to World War II and the Holocaust. So the standard says pre-existing prejudice led to the Holocaust. A very good word to describe that is just anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic views. Please explain to students what this word means, because even though it's not written in the 6th grade standard, it is written in the 7th grade standard when they study the Middle East and Israel relations with the Middle Eastern countries. So they'll already have some background knowledge once they get there. So go ahead and expose them to the word anti-Semitic and help them understand that it is an extreme prejudice and racial hatred towards the religious ethnic group, the Jewish people, who were scattered throughout Europe at that time. Help them to understand that the Nazi Party was very good at propaganda, which is also a vocabulary word in this element, in turning people against the Jews. Tell them that the Nazi Party told people things like the Jewish banker is cheating us, the Jewish baker is greedy, and they're taking advantage of us. That's why we can't afford bread or whatever it is. Because a lot of the people in the Jewish community at that time was more affluent, and so it was easy to turn the masses against the Jewish community through propaganda. So now you've covered the existing prejudice that's written in the standard and propaganda together. A great way to do this is to go and find a few lines out of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf that are translated into English and point out the anti-Semitic propaganda in there. And even though Adolf Hitler himself is not written into the standards, he needs to be covered to whatever degree. Then the last part, the Holocaust, some students might already have an understanding of what the Holocaust is. Don't be surprised if many students do not. You have to decide as an educator how deeply to go into the Holocaust. But I believe that it's developmentally appropriate for 6th graders to understand that about 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. And even in your teacher notes, there are some pictures of the ghettos or the Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And you can show those primary source documents as well. But we do want to be careful, as we know many of those topics and images are maybe a little advanced for this age group. On that note, I did always play The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is rated PG and available on Amazon, because it showed the horrors of the Holocaust without some of the really, again, age inappropriate images. But it's still pretty tense. A lot of my girls and probably guys cried in that movie. So you want to warn students, and you want to send home a note or a message about viewing the movie. Let's move on to element C. It is all about after World War II and the Cold War. I think that a word that was taken out of the standards when they were revised this last time that's really important to understand is what is a superpower. The standards used to talk about the world superpowers after World War II. Let's talk about that for a second. You will need to let students understand this concept so they'll understand why we were having a Cold War. Of course, after the bombing of Nagasaki, Japan, and Hiroshima, the world knew that we had weapons of mass destruction, if you will, the atomic bomb. Well, soon our rivals got that, mainly the USSR. And so these superpowers were in a tense Cold War. Explained to them that a Cold War is when you're not really shooting at each other. It's not a hot war, but it's always the threat of a hot war. So help them to understand that the United States and the USSR are main rivals in this conflict or potential conflict. So the standard talks about the reunification of Germany. Well, students don't know why Germany was divided, so you have to fill in that knowledge gap and let them know that the United States and the USSR, the Soviet Union, decided to split Germany in half. And I always tell students that this is a laboratory of government, that we could see which government would work best for the people, a democracy or communism. Now, students also will need to be introduced to the terms Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, which was always hard for them to understand because both of them were symbolic of a division. However, we know that the Iron Curtain was metaphorical and the Berlin Wall was quite literal. So what I would get students to do, this very fun project where we would mix together salt, flour, water, you can find the recipe anywhere online, to make a clay that would harden. The students would then trace out Germany on a piece of paper or cardboard, and then they would make the clay wall themselves, dividing East and West Germany. The results were phenomenal. Students would get maps and translate the map into their 3D model and put it right down East and West Germany in groups. They were working in groups. They would then have to research more about the Berlin Wall, and they would have to add graffiti to the wall. Something that I learned from students doing this, because I said, oh no, you're putting the graffiti on the wrong side. They were right. The graffiti actually went in West Berlin because that's the side of the wall that people could approach, but on the east side where you didn't have all your freedoms, you couldn't get close enough to the wall. So it was amazing to see students with their graffiti on the wall on the democracy side. And I always told them to make their graffiti, it was in the part of the rubric, as a demonstration of their knowledge of the standards. So students would write things like democracy for everyone or free East Berlin. And again, a rubric went with all of this because they would also have to write a 15 to 20 page, not pages, 15 to 20 sentence summary of everything they learned about the Berlin Wall. To differentiate, I let my lower groups write bullet points. Then, because the standards is all about the reunification of Germany, I would play a video of Ronald Reagan. At the time, there was a brain pop of him. Or I would play a small clip on YouTube where he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And then I would play Tom Brokaw on the night that the wall came down, and it would show the exuberance of the people. I would stop the video and ask the students, why do you think the people are so excited when the wall is literally coming down? And it would show the cranes knocking the wall down and the people stomping on the wall. We would then go outside and they would tear down their own walls. I would be Mr. Reagan and say, tear down this wall. And I have videos of the kids obliterating their walls. And that is the kind of engagement that students will not forget very quickly. So that is a little bit about the Cold War and element C of the standard. I want to end with two things. The first thing is to make sure in the teacher notes, which is provided by Georgia Department of Education and Inspire. Make sure you check out the link at the very top that talks about literature that you can bring in to help these standards even further. For example, they have suggested the Butter Battle book by Dr. Seuss or Yertle the Turtle, which are great. Take a whole day to read these books. Students love to hear you read to them and then have the discussion about how they relate to what they learned in the standard. The second thing I want to tell you after this, at the end of our planning session, is I want to talk to you about resources that I have to help further this standard. I have this great package of game shows. They are modeled after Jimmy Fallon's games, and so please check those out. And also I have a They Say, I Say activity where students take different sides of the argument and they turn in their paper about how they would argue the different sides. And I also have an assessment that is very rigorous for students to show and demonstrate their knowledge of the standards. Guys, this has been an excellent planning session. Thank you for planning with me for this European History Standard. I also have giant bundles to help you with the entire European unit. Thank you very much. Please remember to subscribe. Check me out on all of my socials. And of course, go to teachthisteacher.com to become a member because I'm always giving away free things. See you guys later. Every teacher needs teaching. Thanks, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.